Hello everyone, this is the introduction video to Chapter 9, Human Development. Um, we're going to be talking uh, about human development and specifically I'm going to talk a little bit about what does developmental psychology mean and how do we think about it. And I'm going to go briefly over some things that you're going to be reading in the chapter. The first major topic I want to touch on is the nature versus nurture issue. Um, all throughout history, there has been a argument or a question about to what degree are we a product of nature, that is our biology. Sometimes people would have said what's in your blood. Today we might say what's in your genes or what's happening in your brain. That is all nature stuff. Versus how much of who we are it has to do with nurture. That is how we are raised, how we, our parents, our culture, how difficult our lives were. All of these have to do with nurture. And all throughout history, there's been a back and forth. Uh, in the past, they might have said something like, if your parents were criminals, then you're going to be a criminal too, because that is in your nature, it's in your blood. Uh, Today, somebody might say something like, uh, how you're raised has to do with whether or not you become a criminal or not. The truth is that more and more today we understand that it's not a matter of one or the other, but that both of these things play a part in who we become. Yes, how we're raised affects us, but also our biology affects us. If I were to damage my brain, I may no longer have the ability to control my impulses, but of course, that biological aspect by itself won't necessarily turn me into a criminal. If I was born into a family that loved me and hugged me and took care of me, then I might still have issues with impulse control, but they wouldn't necessarily be violent. Our lives are sort of made up of these two issues, nature and nurture. And what science is trying to develop now is a way to figure out to what degree. To what degree is your violent tendencies related to your biology, your nature, and to what degree is it related to your nurture? To what degree is your level of happiness related to nature or related to nurture? You can go down the list. Your intelligence, your physical abilities, etc., etc. So you're going to read a little bit about this issue. Now, one of the things that the book doesn't really cover, but I think is super important, is the cultural idea of the stages of your life. And these have changed a great deal over the centuries. There was a time in our history where people thought of growing up as being part of three levels. You were a baby, you were an adult, and then you became an old person. And people would tell you right around 8, 10 years old, you're an 8-year old boy now. It's time for you to go out and start making money. Or you're an 8, 9-year old girl now. It's time for you to start thinking about getting married. Because right around 8, 9, 10, depending on the culture that you're coming from, people start to think of you as a man or a woman, as an adult. And this really continued for a long, long time. Now, there was an issue uh, that allowed for this, which was if you were working, it was you were around your family. Often, in many cultures, your family chose your relationships for you, and so uh, they weren't going to let you sort of go out and hurt yourself or let somebody else hurt you. And so even though you were considered an adult, you still had family around looking out for you. But uh, the culture starts to change dramatically uh, right around the end of the 1800s. Because, yes, at some point, the kids were out there working in the field with the parents. But eventually, the adults had to leave and start getting jobs at factories, right? Because the Industrial Revolution is happening at this point. And so adults include those 8-year-old kids. And sure enough, they too have to go out and start finding jobs in factories. But the culture has changed dramatically now, right? In the farm, your parents were looking out for you, your family. The people that you worked for, they knew your family, and so they were looking out for you. But now in the factory, no one cares about these kids. And kids start dying, they start getting hurt. And the culture starts to notice that there is a distinct difference between being a child and an adult. And so all of a sudden, we start thinking of children as being part of this stage in life, childhood, and this other stage in life, adulthood, is something else, something for older people. Now, right around this time, uh, Stanley G. Hall is starting to do research in development, and he starts to promote the idea that there is yet another stage of life, a stage of life that people aren't thinking about in between childhood and adulthood. And of course, this is what we would eventually start calling adolescence. But our culture doesn't really start to accept this as a normal part of growing up until around the 1950s. And then all of a sudden, we start to think of the teenage years as being separate from being a child, but also separate from being an adult. Now, developmental psychology continued for quite a while, obviously until modern times. And so, what was at one point uh, being a baby, being a child, a teenager, an adult, or an older person has changed dramatically. Those childhood years have sort of now we include a lot of other sort of middle stages. Um, Specifically, we start talking about neonates. Neonates are going to be infants that are just born or have just been born, infants, obviously. And then childhood, we separate into 2 to 3 levels: early childhood, middle childhood, and late childhood. And then, of course, at the bottom, you see adolescence, childhood, and late adulthood. And today, more and more, we think of another stage there in the middle, which is emerging adulthood. Because for a long time, adulthood has been anything between the ages of around 18 years old to sort of your mid to late 40s. Uh, and obviously, in our culture, the life of an 18-year-old is dramatically different than the life of a 40-year-old. This is because in our culture, 18-year-olds are still finding themselves. An 18-year-old can start a college degree and decide, oh, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to change degrees, or I'm going to leave college altogether. I'm going to go, into the workforce. Or they might start working and decide the opposite. I'm going to stop doing this and go back to college. Um, and really, uh, people as older as 25 sometimes, and more even older, might just stop their lives midway through. They've been working at a job for 5 years, 10 years, and they go, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to figure out something else I want to do. And it is only because our culture allows for that that we can just do this sort of on a whim. In the past, people couldn't do this. In the past, people couldn't say, oh, I'm going to stop working here and I'm not going to feed my kids because I'm going to just find something else to do. Right around 18 years old, people's lives started, and they had to pay bills and take care of family, and they couldn't just quit or change their lives dramatically. But we can, especially young people in our culture, in the Western world, can do this quite easily. They might decide to move states or go to a different country altogether, and maybe go back and maybe stay. Uh, this is because in emerging adulthood, you're an adult, but you don't have all the trappings of being an adult just yet. You still have a lot of freedoms. Not all cultures allow for this. There are still cultures today that right around 18, 19 years old, you're stuck. You're taking care of family, you have a house to pay, you have a life to take care of. You can't just randomly do that. But more and more, we're thinking that emerging adulthood is its own stage, and more research is going into that. Um, Now, I do want to say that this is just sort of the intro here. So, as you're reading through the chapter, you'll notice that sometimes they're talking about biology of a neonate, the biology of early adulthood, the biology of middle childhood, and then they're going to switch the cognitive skills of an early childhood uh, child, the cognitive abilities of an adolescent. And they're going to go back and forth talking about uh, cognition, biology, and personality of the different groups. And of course, development, how those change as we get older. Uh, in the next short video, I'm going to talk about the cognitive skills of the different stages.